When Catherine Stockett's The Help was released in 2009, it became an instant hit and bestseller. Millions of people worldwide were flocking to stores to buy this book. It presented an engaging narrative, written from the perspective of a white upper-middle-class woman who had been raised by her family's maid. For those of you who know the plot and have read the book, you might be thinking, wait, the book wasn't just written from the perspective of a young white woman. It was also written from the perspective of two maids, whom the story's focus is centered on. Yes, I know. I'm not talking about whose stories were told by which characters. I'm talking about who wrote these characters' stories for them, Miss Catherine Stockett. This was essentially her story. She wanted to craft a narrative based on her own experiences of being raised by the maid of her house, and her interpretation of what that maid may have been feeling and what her life may have looked like outside of her world. All in all, her goal was to use her voice to both tell her story and shed light on the experience of Black Americans. So, what's the issue with that, you might be asking? Well, only half of it was her story to tell. Now, I'm not here to talk about the book. No. This essay will predominantly be focusing on the film. Mainly how it has fueled certain storytelling techniques in Hollywood and how this has resultantly reinforced implicit biases among Americans. Now, with that preface cleared, let's get into it. When it came time to adapt the book into a film, there was a big mistake made right off the bat. First, the writers, cast, and crew hired to work on the film were almost all white. In addition, the director, Tate Taylor, is a white male who also happened to be a high school classmate of Catherine Stockett's. Now, when the focus of your story is the 1960s segregated South and supposed to be centered on the stories of two Black women, you would think that more people who share that perspective and/or experience would be brought on to help tell that story. But that wasn't the case. That information alone is all we need to know that the film is going to have some major issues. Many of these issues even transcend beyond race, and we are going to discuss them under my two main umbrellas for this video. The first is that everything is told almost entirely from Skeeter's perspective, and for the sake of moving her storyline and character growth along. Films that follow this formula when telling a civil rights-themed story often find themselves employing what is known as the white savior narrative. The second issue is that this film has no problem condemning and villainizing women who carry traditionally feminine qualities and desires. Yes, we're going there. This film has a serious case of not like other girls. And while that last one might sound nitpicky, it actually connects back to the film's race issue, and I'm going to be talking about that later in the video. Before getting into it, I'm going to give you a brief synopsis of this story, just because, I never want to assume that everyone watching my videos have seen the films that I'm dissecting, so this is for y'all. The Help is a period drama film that tells the story of three women living in Jackson, Mississippi in 1961. These women are Skeeter Phelan, a white upper-middle-class woman who aspires to become a successful writer, Abilene, an African-American domestic worker who works for Skeeter's good friend Elizabeth, and Minnie Jackson, who is also an African-American domestic worker who works for Skeeter's other good friend, Hilly Holbrook. Skeeter is a recent college graduate from Ole Miss, and one of the few women to actually complete her 4-year term there, since most of the girls, including her three best friends, dropped out early to get married and start their families. As mentioned earlier, Skeeter is a writer and wants to make her mark on the world with all that she has to say. However, having just barely gotten her degree, and being a woman, the best job she is able to obtain is that of a ghostwriter for a domestic cleaning column. Because she knows nothing about homemaking, she asks her friend Elizabeth if she would permit her to enlist Abilene to help her with the answers, to which she reluctantly agrees. She and Abilene start working on the columns together, but after Skeeter finds out that her former maid left town without saying goodbye to her, and realizing just how poorly the Help was treated by their employers, she decides that she wants to write a book from their perspective. After getting in touch with the publisher at Harper & Row, she is told that she must enlist a solid number of maids, at least 12, to tell their stories if she wants them to publish her book. She asks Abilene if she'd be willing to tell her stories from working as a maid in Jackson, but keep her identity a secret, to which Abilene, understandably, declines. However, after considerable prayer, she eventually agrees and attempts to enlist her friend Minnie to help as well. Now, Minnie Jackson, who was just fired by Skeeter's other friend Hilly Holbrook, starts to work for the family of Hilly's ex-boyfriend Johnny and his wife Celia, who is an outcast among the other women of Jackson. Minnie is a complex character, In one sense, she is sassy and carries a no funny business attitude. On the other hand, she is also suffering under tremendous pressure and abuse. Besides the fact that she was just fired and has 5 children to feed, her life is in jeopardy every day as her husband is both physically and mentally abusive to her. Minnie is arguably the character that suffers most in this film, yet she maintains the most confident and put-together demeanor of anyone else. She agrees to help with the book, and eventually, the 2 women are able to recruit a great number of maids willing to tell their stories. Once the book is published, Hilly is able to deduce that the book was written by Skeeter and about several Jackson women, including herself and Elizabeth. However, with some embarrassing stories in that book written about her, she does not want to expose herself and instead decides to get Aibileen fired by framing her for theft. As a result, Aibileen is fired from her job. However, besides the heartbreak she feels in having to say goodbye to Mae Mobley, Elizabeth's daughter who she's been looking after, Aibileen walks away with more confidence and optimism about her future than she ever did walking into that home. Skeeter ends up getting a job with Harper & Row Publishing and moves to New York, and Minnie continues to work for Johnny and Celia with the promise of more hours, better pay, and a steady lifelong job. The end. Now, when characterizing a narrative as a white savior trope, there are 2 important factors to consider. The first is whose story is really being told and to what extent the voices of those around them are being heard. So let's take a look at the first. Whose story is being told? When reading the plot of The Help out loud, what was very striking was the realization of just how little the story of the maids are told. In all honesty, we really know nothing about them or their personal lives, except for a few key details. With Skeeter, we can tell you all sorts of things: who her mother is, who raised her, who her friends are, what her romantic history is, etc., etc. And once I realized this, it occurred to me that this is not really supposed to be Minnie and Aibileen's story. It's Skeeter's story, and while they are playing key roles in it, it does not revolve around them. From watching this film alone, you would never know that the book transitioned between the 3 women's perspectives. Now, I'm just gonna say it. I don't see anything inherently wrong with telling a story from the perspective of a white girl living in a segregated town in the 1960s. So long as racial injustice is not the central theme. But that's not the case with The Help. Racial injustice is a prominent, if not the most important theme to emerge from this film. If this is a story that's going to be told from Skeeter's perspective, it should be limited only to what she knows. I don't think it's very wise to narrate the lived experiences of other people that you have not experienced yourself. Aside from that, the movie is called The Help, and your story is supposed to be told from the perspective of the maids as well, if not most prominently. It's important to invest as much time into their lives apart from Skeeter as they do in her life apart from them. However, the film we get is one that views racism from the lens of a young white woman who sees their stories as a means to get her foot in the door of the publishing world. Although she is fair and distributes the earnings among all the women who contributed to the book with their stories, it doesn't erase the fact that their struggles in their profession and life in general as Black women in Jackson are what pushed Skeeter through that door. Furthermore, almost everything that occurs in the lives of Minnie and Aibileen contribute in some way to pushing Skeeter's narrative forward. Even the revenge pie that Minnie baked for Hilly, with a special ingredient, was helpful to Skeeter since including that story in the book was the insurance they needed to back Hilly into a corner and keep her silent, since she would never want that story to get out. Now, this is not to say that Skeeter's experience is invalidated in any way. Simply, her worldview just needs to be challenged a little bit, not only for her sake and the maids, but also for the audience watching. And that doesn't happen. Now, I understand that it's only a natural human tendency to want to distance oneself from past transgressions or wrongs associated with themselves or their likeness. Resultantly, a film like The Help is going to make a white person feel more comfortable to address racism because it makes it feel like an outdated and distant reality that has nothing to do with them and is not their transgression to bear. Contrastingly, films that are told from the perspective of minority creators are often less comfortable to watch because they tend to be a more accurate depiction of what racism can actually look like and confront their audience with the ugly truth that racism is very much still prevalent in this day and age. In The Help, Skeeter meets and exceeds the qualifications of a white savior character. The film presents her actions of writing a book from the point of view of The Help as a noble one that will help raise awareness to the civil rights issues not only in Jackson but throughout the nation at the time. While to some extent this is true, there are a lot of key factors to the situation and the dynamic between Skeeter and the maids that challenge such a simplified view. And these are factors that a lot of people overlook when approaching the subject of racism and discrimination as a whole. When considering power dynamics, Skeeter is in a very privileged position in life. She is a young, beautiful white woman who was raised in an upper middle class family with both of her parents in the picture. She had a good support system growing up, and her family made, and even her circle of friends, bigoted as they were, they always had her back. I mean, almost always. Sure, she wasn't the most popular student in school, and she never really grabbed the attention of men. That's going to come up in our next discussion. But she had all the means in the world to have those things if she really wanted them, so that alone puts her at the top of the social hierarchy of the time. However, what this movie attempts to sell you on is that Skeeter wants to help the maids and give them a voice because, to some extent, she sees herself in them, lacking a voice herself. But this is not true. Skeeter is not like the maids at all. She does have a voice, and she uses it. It is the maids whose very lives are at stake for even discussing the idea of telling their stories to her for her book. Skeeter, while sympathetic to their plight, nevertheless continues to ask Aibileen for her help, and even asks her to consider recruiting other maids. While it takes her a minute to get there, Aibileen does eventually agree to help, and we get a small refreshing moment of Aibileen taking agency when the writing process begins. Skeeter begins asking her questions about specific aspects of being a maid and how she feels. It comes off a bit confining, and you can see Aibileen struggling to put her own thoughts out in a way that is polite and considerable to Skeeter's feelings. Instead, she suggests that she write down her thoughts and entries from her prayer journal and tell her story without any type of filter that might hold her back. But again, it's a 2-minute scene out of a 2-hour film. We also need to consider just how beneficial this book may be to its subjects versus the writer. At a time when the civil rights movement was really revving up, writing such a book would no doubt sell. It was a guaranteed way for Skeeter to get her foot in the door of the writing world. While telling the stories of the maids in Jackson would certainly be beneficial to the overall cause, there is nothing to suggest that the women written about in the book would benefit from it directly. In fact, it's not exactly a secret that the maids in the South are treated poorly. Even Elaine Stein, the New York-based publisher at Harper & Row who agrees to read Skeeter's first draft, warns her that no black maid in her right mind is going to tell her story publicly because that is a hell of a risk to take in Jackson, Mississippi. This tells us that 1, people are very much aware of the unfair conditions of black maids in the South, and 2nd, that the danger of speaking out far outweighs any potential benefits. Where does this leave Skeeter? Well, the worst thing that can happen is that she loses her friends and she doesn't get her first book published, and only the first half of that becomes true. Her first book not only sells, but also gets her a nice, comfy new job in New York. And what happens to the maids? They're left behind in Jackson. In the book, Aibileen takes over Skeeter's writing job for the Miss Myrna letters, but that does not happen in the film. She just retires. Now, when looking at the power dynamics here, tell me who you think is better off. All that said, I think we can conclude with full confidence that this film definitely injects the white savior trope into its narrative. But that's not the only trope they insert into their narrative. Another one that they employ is not like other girls. This film demonizes every single one of its stereotypical feminine characters. Look, I get it. It was 1961 and everyone was getting married and starting families right after college. Women especially were dropping out of college left and right to fulfill this societal expectation. Going against that norm was difficult. I'm not here to come against anyone's lifestyle choice. If you want to go off to New York, become a successful writer, and not worry about settling down and having a family, more power to you. If you want to stay in your hometown, start a family, and dedicate your time and energy to raising your children, also great. But this movie does not do that. It doesn't stay neutral on this, and I'm merely just trying to point out the imbalance. Aside from this trope also inadvertently affects the race issue that this film has, by attempting to put racism under different categories of personality types, which is just dangerous to do. Now, the not like other girls trope is heavily used in film and television today, and I kind of get why. I mean, how else are you supposed to separate your main character from the rest of the pack and make them stand out, right? Well, you don't actually need it. Why? Well, I'm actually saving that discussion for another video about the movie Mean Girls, so keep an eye out for that. It's coming out soon. In The Help, however, the filmmakers used this trope to distinguish the racists from the non-racists. So let's take a look at who our quote-unquote non-racists are. First up is Skeeter. Skeeter was never popular. She never grabbed the attention of men, as stated earlier, and she didn't really date anyone before the start of the film. Aside from that, she went to college alongside her other friends. The difference with her is that she stuck it out and got her degree while her friends dropped out to get married and start families. Skeeter did not want to take this route. Totally okay. She then proceeds to go to a bridge club meeting being hosted at her friend Elizabeth's home. Her friends are excited to see her and exclaim that they thought she'd never leave Ole Miss. Skeeter responds, "It does take 4 years." A bit of a dig, wouldn't you say? They are even excited for her when she says she got a job. Now, granted, they make a couple subtle digs at Skeeter being single too, like calling her job the last stop till marriage, which Hilly disapproves of. Skeeter is the main non-overt racist in this film. She is the one who wants to be different and write a book about the Black experience in the South. Next up we have Celia Rayfoot. I love this woman. She is funny, confident, and is literally just out there trying her best, like all of us. Celia is another prominent non-overt racist in this film. She invites Minnie to sit with her at her table to eat lunch. She enjoys being in her presence and sees her as her friend. But of course, because this is the case, she is also not like other girls. Yeah, Celia is not adept at homemaking. The other women in the town consider her to be white trash because she came from a poverty-stricken side of town called Sugar Ditch. But the main reason that she's outcasted is because Hilly is jealous of her, since she ended up marrying Hilly's ex-boyfriend, Johnny. She gets the help she needs from Minnie to learn the tricks and tidbits of housekeeping and wants to keep Johnny happy. As much as she wants to be like the other women in the town, she is an outcast. Therefore, she apparently could never be a bigot. Now let's take a look at some of our more overt racists. Hilly. Hilly Bulbrook is at the top of the social hierarchy of the time. She is a good wife, mother, has a beautiful home, an army of women who will do anything to please her. Does that sound familiar? Like every other demonized traditional female character? Yeah, because that's exactly what she is. Hilly is the most overt racist character in this film. She openly talks about installing segregated bathrooms, fires Minnie for using hers, pressures Skeeter into putting a racist initiative into the local paper, and frames Abeling for stealing silverware out of spite. Pretty awful, right? Surprising? Considering the trope we're dealing with? No, it's not really all that surprising. Hilly is interesting to me because she is not just one thing. Bigoted as she may be, she is a doting mother, a loving wife, and honestly, you never really get the vibe from her that she expects everyone to be just like her. While she certainly is not hesitant to manipulate others to get what she wants, she never expects anyone to follow the route in life that she chose. In fact, it was Hilly who was first congratulatory of Skeeter for her new job position, despite the fact that she was initially taken aback because it was just not the common thing for women to do at the time. She was also Skeeter's biggest advocate when it came to putting herself out there in the dating world, not out of selfishness, but out of genuine care for her friend. What ultimately broke their friendship was their differing worldviews, especially when these views began to impact their personal lives. That said, none of Hilly's good characteristics outweigh the horrible things she does, and they are certainly not intended to be the main focus of her character. Hilly, in all of her feminine stay-at-home glory, is presented as the main antagonist of the story, and every one of her actions are initiated through the outlet which she has in her position as a stay-at-home mother and active community member. For example, the home health initiative that requires homeowners to build a separate toilet for their help is something she drafted from her own practices and through her influence in the community. In addition, she has the means to withhold financial support from Yul May, the maid she hires after firing Minnie, as the lady of the house. And she also has the influence and means to frame Abeling for stealing from her friend Elizabeth. Ultimately, Hilly's decision to be a stay-at-home mother presented her with all the necessary tools needed to spread her racist views and exercise her antagonistic characteristics. Next we have Elizabeth and Jolene. When considering sidekick characters, oftentimes when you're supposed to dislike them for following the main antagonist, you actually end up just kind of feeling sorry for them. That's how I felt when watching Elizabeth and Jolene. Well, mainly Elizabeth. Elizabeth is one of those sidekicks who you can tell is not comfortable in her own skin, nor confident enough to live her life authentically. Almost everything she does is to please Hilly and those around her. I'm going to correct myself here and clarify that while being a mother and starting a family is a very rewarding experience, that experience can't be realized if it's not what you want for yourself. Elizabeth has no interest in being a mother to her children, leaving all of the childcare responsibilities to Aibileen. While she certainly enjoys playing the role of the happy suburban housewife, she does not necessarily enjoy the experiences that come with it, nor the responsibilities. Rather, she enjoys the benefits of living such a lifestyle, the attention, the accolades, the ability to blend in, and that's just no way to live. Nobody can have a fulfilling life or sustain genuine long-term joy based on others' perception of them alone. Knowing all of this about Elizabeth, it's no surprise that she is willing to subscribe to the racist ideologies shared by her culture, especially when pushed by Hilly. She never even considered that Aibileen should have a separate bathroom from her and her family until Hilly brings it up and pressures her to install one. This not only causes tension between Elizabeth and her husband, who initially refuses to waste his money on something so ridiculous, but also initiates the inevitable rift between Elizabeth's daughter May Mobley and Aibileen, who is the only mother figure she has at this point. Clearly, each of these consequences weighed on Elizabeth's conscience, but she had a complete lack of confidence to stand up against it. 100% she represents the trope of demonizing ultra-femininity because her goal to subscribe to ultra-feminine ways are what make her character unlikable. Now, Jolene's role was not nearly as prominent as Elizabeth's, but significant nonetheless because, like Elizabeth, she is one of the subjects of the book Skeeter writes and helps sustain Hilly's power and influence throughout the story by being subservient to her. Jolene is described by her mate to Skeeter as being mean for sport. And throughout the film, you get the sense that she is the type to judge you if you make one wrong or imperfect move. In fact, had she gotten more screen time, we might have discovered that Jolene was characteristically worse than Hilly. While Hilly is not at all shy about expressing her overtly racist beliefs, she really only cares about them so far as she can use them to help maintain a strong and respectable appearance to the community. Jolene, on the other hand, like Elizabeth, seems to care more about the superficial aspects of such a lifestyle and genuinely enjoys the power she wields over Black people in the South. To her, it's more like a game, and while we only hear about this behavior from insiders in her circle, and in the book, we also see hints of this behavior in her brief but notable appearances throughout the film. I want to lay some praise for Anna Camp right now for her performance because while she didn't have the most lines nor the most frequent scene appearances, she does a lot with her role. She clearly read the book and understands who her character is and gives you hints of it throughout the film. Nonetheless, she is a villain, and again, it is her expectations of what proper femininity looks like and the means she has to treat others poorly through her role as a homemaker that allow her most unlikable qualities to come out. And like her friends, this outshines any positive qualities she may have. Last but not least, we have Charlotte Phelan. Skeeter's mother is literally a vision of what Hilly and Elizabeth are heading towards. Having wielded the same amount of influence that Hilly does in the community currently, Charlotte is a powerful image of what an early 20th century woman was to look like. She was likable, pretty, married young, had children young, and had hired help throughout the entirety of her life. However, she also echoes characteristics of Elizabeth, having a lack of confidence to do anything different than what is considered socially acceptable. This is shown when her maid Constantine's daughter attempts to walk through the dining room during one of her community events, which an elder berates her for. To maintain appearances, Charlotte throws both Constantine and her daughter out, though not necessarily firing her. She even attempts to get her to come back later, but by that point, she had moved to Chicago and passed away shortly after. Nonetheless, as misguided as her actions may be, and unlike Elizabeth, Charlotte seems to genuinely enjoy what she does. She likes hosting community lunches and is invested in the lives of her children. While she does not support all of their life choices, she eventually comes to love and support Skeeter in her desire to move out of state and become a writer, and even starts to turn around some of her worldviews. However, we still see numerous digs at Charlotte throughout the film. One prominent example is when Skeeter is reflecting on a conversation she had in high school with her former maid Constantine, who had since left. She encourages Skeeter, who had a bad day after not getting asked to the school dance and feeling like she would never be able to live up to her mother's expectations. She tells her that she can't let what other people think influence how she sees herself. Good message. Where does it go wrong? When she says, "Your mother didn't pick her life. It picked her." I don't think that's very fair. I think that staying at home and starting a family is a big deal, and it's just as big as going to New York and becoming a writer. There's nothing wrong with either choice, so I don't think we ought to put anyone down for whatever route they chose to take in life. Ultimately, the prominence of this trope in The Help, while frustrating, is not surprising. Everyone needs a hero to root for, and ultimately, it's just not going to be the person who's like everyone else. I think, however, that this film would be better served to examine the complexities of each character, highlight both of their good and bad qualities in balance and how each of them falls short. Skeeter is not a perfect character, and while not as overtly racist as those around her, she does some questionable things throughout the film. This leaves us with a white savior film that demonizes stay-at-home mothers. Such messages are especially dangerous when brought together because it denies the reality that racism can be found anywhere. There is no safe space from it, and anyone can be injected with the wrong set of beliefs regardless of their background. Someone who fits right into society can be racist, just like someone who is an outcast can be one. Anyway, that's all I have to say about The Help. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you can join me on my next video. Thanks, bye.